Rain pounded against the tinted windows of the black Bentley as it crawled through the narrow streets of Camden, Maine. Inside, Harlan Blackstone stared at the gray world outside, his wheelchair locked in place beside the leather seat. At 52, the tech mogul's face showed more lines than his age deserved, each one carved by loss and isolation. "Sir, we'll be at the office in 10 minutes, said the driver, glancing in the rearview mirror. Harlan didn't respond. His attention had suddenly fixed on something outside. Or rather, someone. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watched a young woman standing motionless on the sidewalk. She wore a threadbare coat that did little to protect her from the downpour, but she didn't seem to notice she was getting soaked. Her gaze was locked on a store window display. "Stop the car," Harlan commanded, his voice rough from disuse. "Get ready. You think you know where this story is going. But trust me, you don't. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel." The driver pulled over immediately. Harlan adjusted his position to get a better view. The woman stood outside Ellington's, the most exclusive boutique in town. In the window hung a midnight blue evening gown that seemed to capture all the light around it, even on this dreary day. The woman reached out, her fingertips stopping just short of touching the glass. Her face held an expression Harlan hadn't seen in years, pure, unguarded longing mixed with quiet dignity. When she finally turned away from the window, Harlan noticed she walked with a slight limp. She clutched a worn leather case to her chest, protecting it from the rain more carefully than she protected herself. There was something about her, a quiet determination in her posture despite the obvious exhaustion in her steps, that made Harlan unable to look away. "Maeve," he said, pressing the intercom button to his assistant who was working from his main office. "I need you to find out who that woman is, the one outside Ellington's with the cello case." "Right away, Mr. Blackstone," came the crisp reply. As the woman disappeared around a corner, Harlan felt something stir inside him. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe something he'd thought had died alongside his wife Evangeline in that climbing accident 5 years ago. Harlan's coastal estate loomed against the darkening sky like a fortress. Built on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, the modern structure of glass and steel seemed to both challenge and embrace the wild landscape around it. Inside, technology worth millions hummed quietly, maintaining the perfect environment for a man whose body had betrayed him. Maeve Gordon stood beside Harlan's wheelchair in his study, her tablet in hand. At 38, she had spent the last 7 years managing the details of Harlan's empire, and the last 5 watching him retreat further into himself. Her name is Brielle Winters, sir. 29 years old, works as a music teacher at the Camden Community Center, teaching cello to underprivileged children. Harlan wheeled himself to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, waves crashed against the rocks, sending spray high into the air. "Tell me more." She was orphaned at 12, raised by her grandmother who passed away 3 months ago. She's facing eviction from their apartment next month. Despite her own financial troubles, she often teaches students for free or accepts payment in home-cooked meals when parents can't afford her already minimal fees. "A cellist," Harlan murmured. "Is she any good?" According to local reviews, quite exceptional. She studied at Juilliard on scholarship but had to drop out in her final year when her grandmother became ill. She returned to Camden to care for her. Harlan's fingers drummed against the armrest of his wheelchair. "Is she performing anywhere soon?" Maeve tapped her tablet. "There's a small recital at the community center this Friday evening. She'll be playing alongside some of her advanced students." "Put it on my calendar." Maeve looked up, unable to hide her surprise. Harlan hadn't attended a public event in over 2 years. "Sir?" "You heard me," he said, turning his wheelchair away from the window. "And I want to go alone." The community center was a far cry from the concert halls where Harlan had once watched the world's greatest musicians perform. The folding chairs were uncomfortable, the lighting poor, and the acoustics less than ideal. He positioned his wheelchair in the back row in the shadows, where no one would recognize the reclusive billionaire whose face occasionally still graced the covers of business magazines. The small audience of parents and community members quieted as Brielle Winters walked onto the makeshift stage. In person, she looked even more fragile than she had through the car window. But when she sat down with her cello, something transformed. Her back straightened, her chin lifted, and as she drew the bow across the strings, Harlan forgot to breathe. The first notes of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 filled the room. Harlan closed his eyes. The music pulled at something inside him. Memories of Evangeline, of hiking in the mountains, of feeling the sun on his face without wondering if he'd ever walk again. When he opened his eyes, he watched Brielle's face as she played. Her expression was one of complete absorption, as if the music was flowing through her rather than from her. Her worn cello, clearly an old instrument that had seen better days, nevertheless produced sounds of remarkable depth under her skilled hands. After the performance, Harlan remained in his place while the small crowd dispersed. He watched as Brielle spoke with a colleague, their conversation drifting to where he sat. "Did you hear back about the Philharmonic audition?" the other woman asked. Brielle nodded, her face brightening. "They want me to come in next month. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, but—" Her smile faded. "But what?" "Grandmother's cello needs repairs I can't afford. The neck is warping, and 2 of the strings aren't what they should be. And then there's the matter of looking the part." She gave a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "I don't exactly have anything suitable to wear to an audition with the Philharmonic." Harlan's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. He recognized the look on her face, the same expression she'd worn outside the boutique, staring at that midnight blue dress. The next morning, Harlan sat in his home medical facility, where state-of-the-art equipment monitored his deteriorating condition. Dr. Abrams stood before him, her face carefully neutral as she delivered the news. "The progression is faster than we anticipated, Mr. Blackstone. The experimental treatment your foundation is funding won't be ready in time for me," Harlan finished for her. "I understand." And he did. For the first time since the accident that had taken Evangeline and left him in this wheelchair, Harlan felt true fear grip him. Not fear of death. He'd made his peace with mortality. No, this was fear of insignificance, of leaving nothing behind but buildings with his name on them, and technology that would be outdated in a decade. Later that day, during his physical therapy session, Harlan found himself pushing harder than usual, fueled by a new urgency. "Easy there," said Reeve, his physical therapist of 4 years. Unlike everyone else in his life, she never treated him as fragile or pitiable. "You're going to hurt yourself." "Isn't that your job?" Harlan snapped. "To push me to my limits?" "My job is to help you reach your potential, not break you." She adjusted his position on the mat. "Try again. Slower this time." As sweat beaded on his forehead, Harlan growled, "You don't understand what it's like having these limitations." Reeve met his gaze, her expression uncompromising. "Limitations are just boundaries waiting to be transcended, Mr. Blackstone. The question is whether you'll be defined by what you cannot do or what you choose to do within those constraints." Her words stayed with him as he returned to his study that evening. The vast room was filled with mementos of his success, awards, prototypes of his groundbreaking designs, photographs with world leaders. Empty achievements that suddenly seemed hollow. On an impulse, he pressed the intercom. "Maeve, come in here, please." When his assistant appeared, Harlan had already made his decision. "I need you to do 2 things. First, purchase that blue evening gown from Ellington's, the one in the window display. Find out Brielle Winters' size and have it altered if necessary." Maeve's eyebrows rose slightly, but she made notes without comment. "Second, I need you to find the best luthier in the country. I want Brielle Winters' cello restored to perfect condition before her audition with the Philharmonic. Shall I arrange for a card to accompany these gifts?" Harlan shook his head. "No. Complete anonymity. I don't want her to know where they came from." "May I ask why you're doing this, sir?" Harlan turned his wheelchair to face the window where the last light of day was fading over the Atlantic. "Because music deserves to be heard as it was meant to be played," he said softly. "And some things are worth preserving." As Maeve turned to leave, the study door burst open. A young man with Harlan's stubborn jaw and Evangeline's dark eyes stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "Hello, Father," said Wilder Blackstone, waving a folded paper. "Care to explain why I had to find out about your prognosis from a leaked medical report rather than from you?" Harlan stared at his estranged son, feeling the weight of years of silence and misunderstanding between them. Another broken relationship. Another failure that his money couldn't fix. "Maeve, please leave us," Harlan said quietly. As the door closed behind her, father and son faced each other across a gulf far wider than the few feet of expensive carpet between them. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Wilder asked, his voice shaking as he waved the medical report. "Were you just going to disappear without a word, like you did after Mom died?" Harlan wheeled himself away from the window to face his son. At 28, Wilder had Evangeline's dark curls and intense eyes, but the hard set of his jaw was all Blackstone. The last time they'd spoken had been at the reading of Harlan's revised will a year ago, a meeting that had ended in shouting and slammed doors. "My health is my business," Harlan said flatly. "Your health?" Wilder laughed without humor. "You've got about 6 months according to this. That makes it family business." Harlan's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "We haven't been a family for a long time." "And whose fault is that?" Wilder's voice rose. "You shut me out after the accident. It wasn't just Mom I lost that day." The accusation hung in the air between them. Harlan looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not just anger but deep hurt beneath the surface. It mirrored his own pain, the grief he'd been unable to share. "I couldn't be what you needed," Harlan admitted quietly. "Not after what happened. I didn't need you to be anything but my father." Wilder paced the room, stopping at the large desk where a stack of papers lay. His eyes narrowed as he read the top document. "The Lorelei Winters Foundation? What is this?" Harlan wheeled forward. "It's nothing, just an idea. An idea that involves millions of dollars, according to these figures." Wilder flipped through the papers. "Who is Brielle Winters? And why are you setting up a foundation in her grandmother's name?" "That's none of your concern." Wilder slammed the papers down. "Everything that affects the Blackstone fortune is my concern. You're planning to give away millions to strangers while cutting funding to the medical research that might save your life? Are you out of your mind?" "The treatment won't be ready in time for me," Harlan said calmly. "But the foundation is just another way for you to build your legacy without facing what's right in front of you." Wilder gestured between them. "Me, your son, the family business that you're letting fall apart while you chase after some charity case." Harlan's patience snapped. "Enough. You haven't shown any interest in the company for years. All you care about is your trust fund and your jet-setting lifestyle. Because you pushed me away. Every time I tried to get involved, you shot me down. Not ready. Needs more experience. Doesn't understand the business. Those were your words, Dad. You never gave me a chance." The truth of his son's words hit Harlan hard. He had pushed Wilder away, convinced the boy wouldn't understand the crushing weight of responsibility that came with the Blackstone name. In trying to protect him, he'd created exactly what he feared. A son who felt entitled to wealth but disconnected from its purpose. "I'm putting you on notice," Wilder said, his voice cold. "If you go through with this foundation or any other large charitable donations without consulting me, I'll contest it. All of it." As the door slammed behind his son, Harlan sat motionless in his wheelchair. The silence of the house pressed in around him, reminding him of all he had built and all he had lost. 3 days later, Harlan sat in the back row of a different concert hall. This one was much grander than the community center, the Portland Symphony Hall, where a special showcase of regional talent was being presented. Again, he kept to the shadows, his wheelchair positioned where few would notice him. Brielle was fifth on the program. When she walked on stage, Harlan leaned forward slightly. She wore a simple black dress, not the blue gown that still hung in Ellington's window, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her cello, despite its worn appearance, was cradled against her like an old friend. As she began to play Elgar's Cello Concerto, Harlan closed his eyes. The music washed over him, stirring memories he'd kept locked away. A young Harlan, before his success, before Evangeline, sitting in a small music room while an older woman guided his hands over piano keys, explaining how the mathematics of sound worked. "Music and engineering speak the same language, young man," she had told him. "They both understand that patterns create beauty." That woman, his first music teacher when he was just 10 years old, had planted the seeds that would later grow into his revolutionary acoustical engineering breakthroughs. Without her, there would be no Blackstone Technologies, no fortune, no empire. Her name had been Lorelei Winters. The connection had hit him like a thunderbolt when Maeve first reported Brielle's full name. Could this young cellist be related to the woman who had changed the course of his life? A few discreet inquiries had confirmed it. Brielle was Lorelei's granddaughter. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. When Brielle finished playing, the applause was enthusiastic, but not overwhelming. Harlan watched as she took a modest bow and left the stage. To his trained ear, her playing had been exceptional, not just technically proficient, but emotionally resonant. Yet he could tell that the aging cello was holding her back, its sound lacking the richness it would have had in its prime. After the concert, Harlan instructed his driver to follow Brielle's bus at a distance. It took them to a small apartment building in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Camden. He watched as she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her unit, her limp more pronounced after the long day. "What are we doing here, sir?" his driver asked after they'd been parked for 15 minutes. Harlan didn't answer immediately. What was he doing? Stalking a young woman who reminded him of someone from his past? Or seeking redemption for failures he couldn't fix? "Take me home," he finally said. The next morning, Harlan met with his team of doctors in the medical wing of his home. Their faces were grim as they reviewed his latest test results. "The deterioration is accelerating," Dr. Abrams said. "The nerve damage from the original injury is spreading more rapidly than we anticipated." "How much time?" Harlan asked directly. The doctors exchanged glances. 4 months, Dr. Abrams finally said. "Maybe 6 if we're aggressive with treatment." Harlan nodded, processing the information with surprising calm. "And the experimental protocol my foundation is funding? The early results are promising, but it's at least 18 months from clinical trials. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackstone." After they left, Harlan sat alone in the sterile medical room. 6 months. What could he possibly accomplish in 6 months that would make up for a lifetime of putting work before family, of retreating into isolation after tragedy? His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Maeve. "Sir, I've spoken with James Chen," she said, referring to the master luthier Harlan had hired. "He's examined Ms. Winters's cello. And? It's a remarkable instrument. A genuine Montagnana from 1742, worth over $2 million in proper condition. He was quite shocked to find it in such a state of disrepair." Harlan's eyebrows rose. How could someone like Brielle Winters own such a valuable instrument? According to Chen, there's an inscription inside. "To my beloved Lorelei, may your music always find its way home." It's signed Alessandro Rinaldi, 1963. Harlan's mind raced. Alessandro Rinaldi had been a renowned cellist in the mid-20th century. Somehow, this priceless cello had found its way to Lorelei Winters, perhaps explaining how she had afforded to teach music in a small Maine town while providing such depth of musical education. Chen says he can restore it to its original glory, but it will take 3 weeks, Maeve continued. That's cutting it close for Ms. Winters' audition with the Philharmonic. "Tell him to work around the clock if necessary," Harlan said. "And the dress?" "Purchased. I managed to get her measurements discreetly from the community center's costume department. The alterations will be finished next week." "Good. Remember, complete anonymity." After hanging up, Harlan wheeled himself to the elevator and went down to the basement level of his home. He hadn't visited this room in 5 years. The door opened silently to his private music studio, designed with perfect acoustics. Dust covered the grand piano, the arrays of speakers, and the complicated equipment that had once been the heart of his research into sound technology. This was where he had developed the audio algorithms that had made his first fortune. He rolled his wheelchair to the piano and lifted the cover from the keys. The ivory was yellowed with age and disuse. Tentatively, he placed his fingers on the keys and pressed, wincing at the out-of-tune notes that rang out. "I thought I might find you here." Harlan turned to see Reeve standing in the doorway. She stepped into the room, looking around with interest. "I didn't give you permission to wander my house," he said. She shrugged. "You missed your therapy session. That's not like you." Harlan turned back to the piano. "I got some bad news." "I heard." At his sharp look, she added, "Doctors talk, especially when they're worried about their famous patient." She walked to the piano and sat on the bench beside his wheelchair. Without asking permission, she began to play, a simple, haunting melody that filled the dusty room with life. "You never mentioned you played," Harlan said, surprised. "You never asked." Her fingers moved skillfully over the keys. "We all have parts of ourselves we keep hidden, Mr. Blackstone." Harlan watched her hands. "My teacher used to say that music and mathematics speak the same language." Sounds like a wise person. She was. Harlan felt a tightness in his chest. "I never thanked her properly." Reeve stopped playing and looked at him directly. "It's never too late to say thank you. Even if the person who needs to hear it is gone, there are always ways to express gratitude." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Harlan felt understood in a way he hadn't in years. Not pitied, not feared because of his wealth, just seen. "I have a son," he said abruptly. "He hates me." "Hate is rarely the whole story," Reeve replied. "Usually, it's just the easiest emotion to show when the others hurt too much." Later that night, Harlan sat in his study looking at an old photograph of himself, Evangeline, and a 10-year-old Wilder on a sailing trip. They were all smiling, the wind in their hair, the future bright before them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd truly smiled. His phone buzzed with a text from Maeve. "Everything is arranged. The dress and cello will be delivered to Ms. Winters the morning of her audition." Harlan set the phone down and wheeled himself to the window. Outside, a storm was brewing over the Atlantic, lightning illuminating the churning waters. In less than 6 months, he would be gone. What would he leave behind? A fortune? A company? A son who resented him? Or something more? For the first time since the accident, he felt a sense of purpose stirring inside him. Faint but persistent, like the first notes of a forgotten melody. The morning of Brielle's audition dawned bright and clear. She woke early, her stomach in knots. Today was the day she'd been working toward for years, a chance to join the Philharmonic, to honor her grandmother's memory by following in her musical footsteps. She made herself a cup of tea, trying to calm her nerves. The tiny apartment felt emptier than ever without grandmother Lorelei's presence. Photos of her lined the shelves. Lorelei as a young woman holding her cello. Lorelei teaching a young Brielle her first notes. The two of them at Brielle's Juilliard acceptance ceremony. "I wish you were here," Brielle whispered to the photos. "I don't know if I can do this without you." A knock at the door startled her. It was barely 7 in the morning. Who could be visiting at this hour? When she opened the door, there was no one there. Instead, 2 large boxes sat on her doorstep. The first was long and shaped unmistakably for a cello. The second was flat and wide, with the elegant logo of Ellington's boutique embossed on its lid. Hands trembling, Brielle brought the boxes inside. She opened the cello case first, gasping when she saw her grandmother's instrument. But it wasn't the worn, faded cello she remembered. The wood gleamed with a rich, honeyed glow. New strings had been fitted, the neck repaired, the entire instrument restored to its original glory. A small envelope sat beside the cello. Inside was a note that read simply, "Music deserves to be heard as it was meant to be played. The world awaits your voice." Brielle's eyes filled with tears. Who would do this? Who even knew about her audition and her grandmother's cello? With shaking hands, she opened the second box and pulled back layers of tissue paper. Inside lay the midnight blue evening gown she had admired in Ellington's window. She lifted it carefully, marveling at the feel of the fabric, the perfect craftsmanship. Another note, in the same handwriting. "Sometimes we need to look the part, to play the part." Brielle sat on the floor surrounded by these gifts, overwhelmed by the generosity of her unknown benefactor. She was so absorbed in the mystery that she almost forgot the time. With a start, she realized she had only 2 hours before her audition. Across town, Harlan was also preparing for the day. His health had taken another downturn overnight, and he'd woken to find his legs completely numb, a new development that Dr. Abrams had warned would eventually happen. "Sir, are you sure you want to do this today?" Maeve asked as she helped arrange the communication equipment in his bedroom. A large screen had been set up so Harlan could watch a live stream of the Philharmonic auditions, a feed specially arranged through his connections at the concert hall. "I'm sure," Harlan replied, adjusting his position in bed. "Have the car ready to take me to the office afterward. There are papers I need to sign. Dr. Abrams thinks you should rest. Dr. Abrams isn't in charge of my schedule." His tone ended the discussion. At exactly 10 o'clock, the screen lit up with a view of the audition hall. A small panel of judges sat at a table, their expressions serious as they reviewed notes. One by one, cellists entered, played their pieces, and left. Some were technically proficient but lacked emotion. Others played with feeling, but made small mistakes. Then Brielle walked onto the stage. Harlan leaned forward slightly. She wore the midnight blue gown, looking as if it had been made for her. With her hair swept up and her posture confident, she seemed transformed from the woman he'd seen standing in the rain. She carried her grandmother's restored cello with reverence, settling into the chair with practiced ease. When she began to play, Harlan closed his eyes. The rich, warm tones of the Montagnana filled the room, even through the screen speakers. She had chosen Bach's Cello Suite No. 5, one of the most challenging in the repertoire, but also one of the most moving when played well. And she played it very well indeed. Her fingers danced across the strings, her bow moving with precision and passion. The music spoke of longing, of struggle, of perseverance, and ultimately, of triumph. It was the story of her life, told through century-old compositions. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the judges began to make notes. Harlan could tell from their expressions that they were impressed. One leaned over to whisper to another, who nodded with a smile. "Thank you, Ms. Winters," the head judge said. "We'll be in touch." As Brielle left the stage, Harlan felt a curious sense of peace wash over him. Whatever happened next, he had given her a fair chance. The rest was up to her talent, which, he had no doubt, was exceptional. The screen went dark as the live stream ended. Harlan sat back, suddenly exhausted. "Maeve," he called, his voice weaker than before. "Get me Wilder on the phone." Brielle clutched her restored cello case as she rode the bus back to Camden. Her mind was still spinning from the events of the day, the mysterious gifts, the audition that had gone better than she could have hoped, and the call she'd received just as she was leaving the concert hall. "Ms. Winters," the head judge had said, catching her in the lobby, "the committee has made an unprecedented decision. We would like to offer you a position with the Philharmonic, starting next month." She had nearly dropped her cello in shock. "But, don't you usually deliberate for days?" The woman had smiled. "Sometimes when you hear exactly what you've been looking for, there's no need to wait." Now, sitting on the bumpy bus, Brielle still couldn't believe it was real. She had done it, fulfilled her grandmother's dream for her, secured a future doing what she loved. and someone had helped make it possible. But who? The question nagged at her. She was determined to find out, if only to express her gratitude properly. Her first stop when she got home was Ellington's boutique. The elegant saleswoman recognized the dress immediately when Brielle described it. "Oh yes, that piece was quite special. A gentleman purchased it last week." "A gentleman?" Brielle asked. "Did he leave a name?" The saleswoman hesitated. "I'm not supposed to say. He requested anonymity." "Please," Brielle said. "I just want to thank him. These gifts changed my life today." Something in her earnest expression moved the saleswoman. The purchase was made through an assistant, but the name on the credit card was Blackstone. Harlan Blackstone. Brielle's eyes widened. Everyone in Maine knew that name, the reclusive tech billionaire who lived in the massive estate on the cliff. After his tragic accident 5 years ago, he had withdrawn from public life almost completely. Why would Harlan Blackstone help me? She wondered aloud. The saleswoman shrugged. "I couldn't say, but his assistant was very specific about the dress being delivered today, along with something else." Brielle thanked her and left the shop, her mind racing. Her next stop was Chen's String Instruments, where she hoped to learn more about the restoration of her grandmother's cello. The elderly luthier smiled when she entered. "Ah, the Montagnana. How did she sound?" "Like a dream," Brielle replied honestly. "I can't believe the difference. It's like hearing her true voice for the first time." "It is a remarkable instrument," Chen said, running his fingers lovingly over the cello case. "One of only a handful Montagnana made during his golden period. Worth a small fortune," Brielle gasped. "A fortune? But my grandmother was a music teacher. How could she afford such an instrument?" Chen's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes great instruments find their way to the musicians who deserve them, regardless of wealth. Did you never notice the inscription inside?" Carefully, Chen tilted the cello to show Brielle the handwritten words inside. "To my beloved Lorelei, may your music always find its way home. Alessandro Rinaldi, 1963. "Alessandro Rinaldi?" Brielle whispered. "The famous cellist? He knew my grandmother?" "More than knew her, I suspect," Chen said gently. "A gift like this speaks of deep affection." Brielle's mind reeled with this new information about her grandmother's past, but she had come seeking answers about the present. "Mr. Chen, who commissioned the restoration of this cello?" Like the saleswoman, Chen hesitated before answering. "A man who appreciates fine instruments and finer music, Mr. Blackstone." "Did he say why?" "He did not, but his assistant was most insistent that the work be completed before your audition today." Brielle left the shop with more questions than answers. Why would one of the richest men in America take an interest in her musical career? How did he even know about her audition? There was only one way to find out. Harlan was reviewing documents in his study when Maeve entered, looking uncomfortable. "Sir? There's a young woman at the gate, Brielle Winters. She's asking to see you." Harlan's hands stilled on the papers. "Did you tell her I'm not receiving visitors?" "I did, but she's quite persistent. She says she won't leave until she can thank you in person." Harlan wheeled his chair to the window, looking out at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. How did she find out it was me? She must have traced the purchases. "I'm sorry, sir. I thought we'd been careful." Harlan was silent for a long moment. "Let her in." 15 minutes later, Brielle Winters stood in his study doorway. She still wore the blue dress, though she had left her cello in the car. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Harlan in his wheelchair, but she quickly composed herself. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, stepping forward. "I'm Brielle Winters. I believe I have you to thank for my good fortune today." Harlan gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down." As she took a seat, he studied her face. Up close, he could see hints of Lorelei in her features, the determined set of her chin, the intelligent eyes. "I was hoping to remain anonymous," he said. "Why?" Brielle asked directly. "Why would you help a stranger?" Harlan smiled faintly. "But we're not strangers, are we?" "Not really. Your grandmother was Lorelei Winters." Brielle nodded slowly. "Did you know her?" "She was my first music teacher when I was 10 years old." Harlan wheeled his chair to a cabinet and opened a drawer. He withdrew an old photograph and handed it to Brielle. She looked at the faded image of a young boy sitting at a piano, a middle-aged woman with familiar eyes guiding his hands on the keys. "Grandmother taught you?" Brielle whispered, her fingers tracing her grandmother's face in the photo. "She taught me that music and mathematics speak the same language," Harlan said. "That understanding became the foundation of my work in acoustical engineering, the basis for everything I built." Brielle looked up at him, realization dawning. "So the gifts? We're repaying a debt I've owed for 40 years, Harlan finished. "Your grandmother saw potential in a difficult child from a troubled home when no one else did. She opened a door for me. I wanted to do the same for her granddaughter." Tears filled Brielle's eyes. "She never mentioned you." "She wouldn't have. Lorelei never boasted about her students' accomplishments. She believed the music should speak for itself." He paused. "I heard you play this morning. She would have been proud." Brielle wiped away a tear. "I got the position. With the Philharmonic." "I know. Congratulations." Harlan's face softened. "You earned it with your talent. The dress and the cello were just details." "Important details," Brielle insisted. "I can never repay you." "There's no need. As I said, I was settling an old debt." Harlan looked tired suddenly, the lines in his face deeper than before. "I'm glad you came, Ms. Winters, but I'm afraid I must ask you to excuse me. I'm not well." Brielle stood, concern crossing her face. "Of course. I didn't mean to intrude." As she turned to leave, Harlan called after her. "Ms. Winters?" She looked back. "Would you consider visiting again? Perhaps playing something on that cello of yours? This house has been without music for too long." Brielle smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed her face. "I'd be honored, Mr. Blackstone." After she left, Harlan sat in the growing darkness of his study. For the first time in years, the emptiness of the house felt like a temporary condition rather than a permanent state. His phone rang, Wilder returning his call from earlier. "What is it, Dad?" his son asked, his voice guarded. "I'd like to see you," Harlan said simply. "There are things we need to discuss. About the company, about the future." There was a long pause before Wilder answered. "I'll come tomorrow." After hanging up, Harlan wheeled himself to the elevator and down to the music room in the basement. The space felt different now, less a mausoleum to the past and more a room waiting to be filled with sound again. He touched the piano keys lightly, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. "The mathematics of music and the mathematics of the universe speak the same language," he murmured, remembering Lorelei's words from so long ago. Perhaps it wasn't too late to learn a new melody after all. Over the next 2 weeks, Brielle visited Harlan's estate almost daily. Each afternoon, she would arrive with her cello and play in the music room while Harlan listened. Sometimes they would talk afterward. About Lorelei, about music, about Brielle's plans for her new position with the Philharmonic. Other times they would simply sit in comfortable silence, the music having said all that needed to be said. As April turned to May, Harlan's condition worsened. More often than not, Brielle would find him in bed rather than in his wheelchair, the medical equipment in his room multiplying with each visit. Yet his mind remained sharp, and he seemed to draw strength from their conversations and from her music. "Play the Bach again," he requested one rainy afternoon. The Suite No. 1. Brielle positioned her cello and began to play the familiar notes. Through the music, she tried to express her gratitude not just for his generosity, but for the connection they had formed. This unlikely friendship between a struggling musician and a billionaire who had both been touched by the same remarkable woman. As the last notes faded, the door to Harlan's bedroom opened, A young man with dark, curly hair stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "I didn't realize you had company," he said to Harlan. "Wilder." Harlan's voice brightened slightly. "Come in. I'd like you to meet Brielle Winters. Brielle, this is my son, Wilder." Brielle set down her bow and stood. "It's nice to meet you." Wilder nodded stiffly. "Likewise." He turned to his father. "We had a meeting scheduled, about the board restructuring." "Yes, of course." Harlan looked tired but determined. "Brielle, would you excuse us? Business matters." "Of course." She packed up her cello quickly. "I'll come back tomorrow if that's all right." "I'd like that," Harlan said. As she left the room, she heard Wilder say, "So that's her, the musician you're so invested in." The door closed before she could hear Harlan's response. The next day, Brielle arrived to find not Harlan waiting for her, but Wilder. He sat in the music room, looking uncomfortable amid the dusty equipment. "My father isn't feeling well today," he said as she entered. "The doctors are with him." "I should go then," Brielle said, turning to leave. "No." Wilder stood. "He asked me to tell you to stay, to play. He can hear the music through the sound system. This house is wired so he can listen from any room." Brielle hesitated, then nodded. She set up her cello while Wilder watched with barely concealed curiosity. "May I ask you something?" he said as she tuned the strings. "Of course." "Why are you here? What do you want from my father?" Brielle's hands stilled on the cello. "I don't want anything from him. He's already given me more than I could ever repay." "The dress? The cello repairs? Those are nothing to a man with his wealth." "I'm not talking about the gifts," Brielle said quietly. "I'm talking about the time he's spent with me, the stories about my grandmother, the way he listens when I play." Wilder's expression softened slightly. "He used to listen like that when my mother played the piano. I'd forgotten that look on his face." Brielle began to understand. "You think I'm trying to replace your mother somehow? Aren't you? The young musician who suddenly appears in his life bringing music back into this house? It's a little convenient, don't you think? Your father helped me because my grandmother helped him when he was a child," Brielle explained. "I come here to play because music is the language we both understand. There's nothing more to it than that." Wilder studied her face, searching for deception and finding none. "He's dying, you know." "I know." "And yet you keep coming, watching it happen. Why?" Brielle thought about her answer carefully. "Because no one should have to face the end alone, not even a billionaire with a beautiful house on a cliff." Something in her simple honesty seemed to reach Wilder. He sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "I haven't been here for him. Not really." "You're here now," Brielle pointed out. "That matters." She began to play, not Bach this time, but Elgar's Salut d'amour, a piece about love and connection. As the music filled the room, she watched Wilder close his eyes, perhaps remembering a time when music was a regular part of this household, before tragedy had silenced its rooms. A week later, Harlan called Maeve and Brielle to his study. Though he had been confined to bed most days, he had insisted on being in his wheelchair for this meeting. His appearance shocked Brielle. He had lost weight, and his skin had a grayish cast, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about legacies, about music, about what remains when we're gone." Maeve stood by his desk, tablet in hand, her expression carefully neutral. "I've established a foundation," Harlan continued, looking at Brielle. "The Lorelei Winters Foundation for Musical Education. It will provide instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities to talented children who lack resources." Brielle's hand went to her mouth. That's incredible." "The foundation will need an artistic director," Harlan said. "Someone who understands not just music, but also what it means to overcome obstacles to pursue a passion. I'd like that person to be you," Brielle. Me? She shook her head in disbelief. But I don't know anything about running a foundation. You won't be alone. Harlan glanced at Maeve. The business side will be handled by professionals. Your role would be to shape the artistic vision, to choose the students, to ensure that the music remains at the heart of everything. I don't know what to say, Brielle whispered. Say yes, Harlan replied simply. It would mean a great deal to me. Before she could answer, the door opened and Wilder walked in. His eyes narrowed when he saw Brielle. I thought we discussed this, Dad, he said, his voice tight. No major decisions about the foundation without consulting me. That's why I asked you to join us, Harlan said calmly. I want you involved, Wilder. In fact, I want you to serve as the foundation's executive manager, working alongside Brielle. Both Wilder and Brielle stared at him in shock. You want us to work together? Wilder asked incredulously. I do. Harlan's gaze moved between them. The foundation needs both of you, Brielle's artistic vision and your business acumen. Together, you could build something remarkable. Wilder opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, studying his father's tired face. This really matters to you, doesn't it? More than anything, Harlan admitted. It's the most important thing I'll leave behind. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Wilder nodded. I'll do it. For you. Harlan turned to Brielle. And you? She thought of her grandmother, of the generations of music students who might benefit, of the chance to give others the opportunities she had struggled so hard to find. Yes, she said. I'd be honored. Harlan's face relaxed into a smile. Good. Then there's one more thing to discuss. The foundation's public launch. 2 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Camden Harbor Hotel was filled with Maine's elite. Business leaders, philanthropists, musicians, and press mingled as waiters circulated with champagne. On a small stage, a string quartet played quietly, setting the tone for the evening. Brielle stood near the entrance, almost unrecognizable in a new gown. Not blue this time, but a deep emerald that complemented her auburn hair. She greeted guests with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, answering questions about the foundation's mission. Beside her, Wilder performed the same duty, the two of them achieving an uneasy but functional partnership. He's here, Wilder murmured, nodding toward the door. Harlan entered in his wheelchair, pushed by Maeve. The crowd parted respectfully, many people clearly shocked by his appearance. Few had seen him in public since the accident 5 years ago, and fewer still knew how ill he had become. With Maeve's help, Harlan made his way to the stage. The room fell silent as he positioned his wheelchair before the microphone. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice weaker than Brielle remembered but still carrying authority. Many of you are surprised to see me. I've been somewhat reclusive these past years. A small ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. Tonight is not about me, however. It's about music, about opportunity, about ensuring that talent finds a way to be heard, regardless of circumstance. He gestured to Brielle. Ms. Winters, would you join me, please? Brielle made her way to the stage, conscious of all eyes on her. This remarkable young woman, Harlan continued, represents everything the Lorelei Winters Foundation stands for: talent, perseverance, and the transformative power of music. She will serve as the Foundation's artistic director, bringing her considerable gifts to the next generation of musicians. He nodded to Wilder, who also made his way to the stage. And my son, Wilder Blackstone, will serve as executive manager, bringing the same innovative spirit to the foundation that has made Blackstone Technologies a leader in its field. Wilder stood a little straighter, meeting his father's gaze with newfound respect. Together, Harlan said, they will ensure that no child with musical gifts will stand outside a window, longing for opportunities beyond reach. As he finished speaking, Harlan's face suddenly paled. His hand gripped the armrest of his wheelchair as he struggled to remain upright. Dad? Wilder stepped forward in alarm. "I'm all right," Harlan insisted, though it was clear he was not. Brielle moved quickly to his side, taking his hand as Wilder signaled for medical help. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Harlan Blackstone, one of the most powerful men in Maine, showed his vulnerability before them all. As the medical team rushed in, Harlan looked up at Brielle, his expression serene despite his obvious distress. "Play for them," he whispered. "Let them hear what this is all about." As Harlan was wheeled from the room, Brielle stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then, acting on instinct, she walked to where her cello waited in its case by the stage. The room remained silent as she sat up, all eyes following her movements. With a deep breath, she began to play Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, the piece she had played for Harlan on that first day at the community center. The music filled the room, rising to the ornate ceiling and washing over the guests. In each note was a story, of struggle and triumph, of loss and renewal, of connections that transcended time and circumstance. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. One by one, people began to applaud, the sound swelling until it seemed the walls themselves might shake. In that moment, Brielle understood what Harlan had done. He had not just created a foundation or provided her with opportunities. He had built a bridge between past and future, between wealth and art, between his world and hers. 3 days later, Harlan Blackstone passed away peacefully in his home, with Wilder at his side and Brielle playing softly in the next room. The news made headlines across the country, the reclusive tech billionaire who had emerged at the end to establish a foundation that would change countless lives. At the funeral, Brielle played one last time for Harlan, her cello's voice carrying across the windswept cliff where he was laid to rest beside Evangeline. Afterward, as people dispersed, she found herself standing alone at the grave, thinking of all that had happened in the short time she had known this complex man. "He left you something," Wilder said, approaching with an envelope in his hand. "He asked me to give it to you after the service." Brielle took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in Harlan's shaky handwriting. "Music and mathematics speak the same language, the language of patterns that create beauty. Thank you for reminding me of that lesson, which your grandmother taught me so long ago. The patterns continue, Brielle. Play them well." Below his signature was a postscript. "The Montagnana is yours, of course. It always was." Wilder stood beside her, reading the note over her shoulder. "He changed in these last weeks," he said quietly. "Being around you, hearing the music again, it brought back the father I remembered from childhood." "I wish I had known him longer," Brielle replied. "We have work to do," Wilder said after a moment. "The foundation, it's what he wanted." Brielle nodded, tucking the note carefully into her pocket. "Yes, we have work to do." As they walked away from the grave, down the path that led to the massive house on the cliff, Brielle thought about the strange circles life sometimes made. Her grandmother had taught a young Harlan Blackstone, planting seeds that grew into a technological empire. Now, that same empire would fund a foundation in her name, allowing her musical legacy to continue through generations of students yet to come. And at the center of it all had been a chance moment. A disabled millionaire noticing a humble woman admiring a dress she couldn't afford. A small act of kindness that had rippled outward, changing both their lives and countless others. 6 months later, Brielle stood on the stage of the Philharmonic, the midnight blue dress replaced by the traditional black of the orchestra. As she played among her fellow musicians, she sometimes felt as if there were 3 people watching her from the audience. Her grandmother Lorelei, smiling with pride, Harlan finding peace in the music, and a younger version of herself, the girl who had once stood in the rain, looking through a window at something she thought she could never have. The Montagnana sang beneath her fingers, its rich voice carrying to every corner of the concert hall. And in a converted warehouse across town, 30 children who would otherwise never have touched an instrument practiced under the guidance of teachers from the Lorelei Winters Foundation, continuing the pattern that had begun so many years before: music and mathematics, patterns that create beauty. A circle, complete.